Imagine the world waking up to a headline that feels like the end of an era. The legendary Gene Hackman, one of the last great giants of Hollywood's golden age of cinema, has passed away. For decades, Hackman was a man of mystery on screen, but deeply private off it. He avoided the spotlight like few stars of his caliber ever did. But now, in the wake of his death, a voice long hidden in the shadows has finally spoken. His daughter, who has lived most of her life away from Hollywood's flashing lights, is breaking her silence. And what she reveals is both heartbreaking and deeply human. Gene Hackman wasn't just another actor. He was one of the most powerful presences ever to grace the silver screen. From his Oscar-winning role in The French Connection to unforgettable performances in Unforgettable Hoosiers, and even as Lex Luthor in Superman, Hackman carried an intensity that few could rival. Yet, while audiences were captivated by his ferocious energy, his piercing eyes, and that unmistakable voice, very little was ever known about the man behind the legend. Hackman avoided interviews, rarely gave the press a chance to peek into his private world, and retired quietly, almost vanishing from Hollywood without a grand farewell tour. So when the news of his passing spread, fans were desperate for answers. Who was Gene Hackman in his final years? What kind of father was he? Did his family share the same closeness that so many fans imagined? And now, his daughter's voice offers a glimpse into that hidden world, one that is far more complicated, far more emotional, and far more human than most people ever expected. She begins by painting a portrait of her father not as a Hollywood icon, but as a man. She recalls growing up in the shadow of fame, watching her father transform himself for roles that would later be hailed as masterpieces. But to her, he wasn't just Popeye Doyle chasing criminals through the gritty streets of New York. He wasn't just the ruthless villain plotting Superman's downfall. He wasn't even the hardened coach leading a small-town basketball team to victory. To her, he was simply Dad, a man who, despite his towering presence on screen, carried quiet insecurities and the weight of his own past. Hackman was famously tough on himself, a perfectionist who demanded everything from his craft. His daughter reveals that this same intensity sometimes followed him home. He wasn't always easy to live with. There were moments of tension, times when the family felt the pressure of being tied to a man who was always chasing excellence, always working to prove himself, even when the world already considered him one of the greatest actors alive. But alongside those difficult moments, she remembers the tenderness that few people ever saw. The little gestures of affection, the moments where he'd sit with her in the quiet of the evening, offering advice not as an actor but as a father, and, perhaps most strikingly, she reveals that Hackman never truly believed in his own myth. While fans saw him as a legend, he often saw himself as just a man who worked hard, got lucky, and tried to provide for his family. He downplayed his fame, even as awards and accolades piled up. His daughter remembers that he rarely spoke of his films at home. In fact, sometimes he seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. Hollywood might have seen Gene Hackman as larger than life, but at home, he wanted nothing more than to live like anyone else. As her voice trembles with emotion, she describes the final years of his life. Hackman had retired from acting in the early 2000s, choosing a life of quiet seclusion in New Mexico. He spent his days painting, writing novels, and tending to the simple pleasures of everyday life. Far from the red carpets and flashing cameras, he found solace in a slower pace. For his daughter, those years became a gift, a chance to know her father, not as the actor, but as the man he had always longed to be. She tells stories that fans might find surprising. Gene Hackman, the man who once terrified audiences as a villain, could be gentle and patient when teaching his grandchildren how to ride their bikes. The man who seemed so commanding on screen could sit for hours, lost in his art, painting landscapes with the same focus he once brought to the stage. The same man who could deliver fiery monologues in films spoke softly and humbly at home, sometimes barely raising his voice. Yet, as she breaks her silence, there is no attempt to paint him as perfect. She admits the relationship wasn't always easy. Fame casts long shadows, and being the child of a legend often meant dealing with expectations that were never spoken but always present. She remembers times when his dedication to his craft meant he wasn't there as much as she wished. Times when his fiery temper could flare, leaving scars that took years to heal. But in her words, there is no bitterness, only understanding. She sees her father now not as a flawless hero, but as a man complicated, passionate, flawed, and deeply human. And perhaps that is the most powerful truth of all. Behind every legend is a person. Behind every movie we watch, behind every performance that moves us, there is a human being who laughs, who struggles, who fails, and who loves. Hackman's daughter reminds us that even the greatest actors cannot escape the realities of life. That the roles we see on screen are only fragments of the whole story. She speaks of his passing with a sense of peace. Yes, the world lost a legend, but she lost a father. And though grief lingers, she finds comfort in knowing that he left behind not just a body of work that will outlive all of us, but also the quiet lessons he passed on to his family. Lessons about resilience, about the pursuit of excellence, and about the importance of staying true to yourself no matter how the world tries to define you. In her silence, she carried years of unspoken memories, And now, in breaking that silence, she offers the world something more precious than any film role, a glimpse into the heart of the man behind the legend, a reminder that even the brightest stars eventually fade, but the light they leave behind continues to shine in the lives they touched. Gene Hackman may no longer be with us, but his spirit lingers in the films that continue to inspire, in the performances that defined generations, and in the love of a daughter who, at last, has found the courage to share her story. And for us, the audience, it is a powerful reminder to look beyond the screen, to remember the humanity of our heroes, and to cherish the people we love while we still have the chance. The world of cinema is built on legends, but every so often, one figure rises above the rest, a name that doesn't just belong to Hollywood history, but to the very essence of storytelling itself. Gene Hackman was that kind of figure. His face, his voice, his presence everywhere he went on screen, he carried with him an intensity that demanded attention. But as the world now mourns his passing, a silence has finally been broken. His daughter, who has long lived outside the glare of celebrity culture, has spoken out for the first time. And what she reveals is not just about Gene Hackman the actor, but Gene Hackman, the man. For those who grew up watching his movies, Hackman felt immortal. He was the tough as-nails detective chasing criminals through the gritty streets of New York in The French Connection. He was the rugged coach inspiring a group of underdogs to greatness in Hoosiers. He was the cunning villain Lex Luthor, bringing Superman to his knees. He was the sheriff in Unforgiven, standing toe-to-toe with Clint Eastwood in one of the greatest westerns ever made. These roles didn't just entertain us, they defined eras of cinema. But what his daughter shares reminds us of something audiences often forget. Behind every role, behind every carefully written line, there was a man, a father, a human being, both brilliant and flawed. She begins by remembering her childhood, when she would sit in darkened theaters and watch her father transform into someone else entirely. The crowd around her would cheer, gasp, or sit in awe, and she would feel pride, but also confusion. To millions of people, this was Gene Hackman, the star, the legend. But to her, it was simply Dad. He wasn't larger than life at home. He was quiet, sometimes distant, sometimes consumed by his work, and yet, she remembers small gestures that told her who he really was. The way he made time to tuck her into bed after a long day on set, the way his face softened when he wasn't performing for anyone. What she reveals paints a far more complicated picture than the Hollywood myth. Hackman wasn't always easy to live with. His perfectionism, the same drive that made him one of the greatest actors of all time, sometimes spilled into family life. He could be strict, sometimes short-tempered, sometimes demanding, but it wasn't. Cruelty was the same intensity he carried into everything he did. He wanted the best from himself, and he wanted the best for his family. And while that meant friction at times, it also meant they lived with a man who believed in discipline, hard work, and resilience. Her voice softens when she talks about his retirement. In 2004, Hackman made the decision to walk away from acting. Completely, no farewell tour, no big announcements. He simply stepped away and never looked back. For fans, it felt like a disappearance. One day he was here, the next he was gone. But for his daughter, it was the beginning of a new chapter. She finally had the chance to know her father, away from the cameras, away from the roles, away from the constant demand of being Gene Hackman, Hollywood star. In those years, she says, she saw sides of him that the public never would. He became quieter, gentler, more at peace. He painted, he wrote novels, he spent time in the stillness of his New Mexico home. She recalls afternoons where they would simply sit together in the backyard, watching the sun fade over the horizon. No grand speeches, no rehearsed performances, just silence, shared between a father and daughter. And for her, those moments became priceless. But she doesn't shy away from the harder truths. Being Gene Hackman's daughter wasn't always easy. The weight of his fame followed her everywhere. Teachers, friends, strangers, they all knew who her father was. And yet, at home, he downplayed it. He never bragged, never basked in the glory of his work. If anything, she says, he sometimes seemed embarrassed by the attention. He saw himself as lucky, not legendary. He didn't like to dwell on his films. He preferred to talk about everyday things, the weather, the news, the garden, and in the final years of his life, Hackman's humility became even more pronounced. She shares stories of him helping neighbors, quietly donating to causes without any fanfare, living life as simply as he could. For a man who once dominated Hollywood, he was content being invisible. To his daughter, that was the real Gene Hackman, not the Oscar-winning actor, but the man who just wanted peace, family, and simplicity. When she speaks of his passing, there's a heaviness in her voice. She admits that even though he lived a long, full life, nothing prepares you for the loss of a parent. The grief comes in waves. Sometimes it feels like a weight pressing down on her chest. Other times it comes in sudden flashes of memory, a photograph, a movie playing late at night on television. But even in that grief, there is gratitude. Gratitude that she had the chance to know him, not just as a public figure, but as a father. Gratitude for the lessons he taught her. Gratitude for the quiet moments, the private words of wisdom, the love that despite everything was always there, and so in breaking her silence, she reminds the world of something vital. Our heroes are human, they stumble, they fall, they struggle. They are not gods, no matter how brightly they shine on screen. Gene Hackman was a legend, yes, but he was also a man. And maybe that's what made him such a great actor. He understood humanity in all its flaws and contradictions. He knew how to channel anger, sadness, joy, and love because he lived them. As her words settle, you can't help but feel a sense of closure. For decades, Hackman kept his life a mystery. But now, through the voice of his daughter, we see the truth. A father who wasn't perfect, but who loved deeply. A man who left behind not just unforgettable films, but a family who carries his memory forward. The world may never see another Gene Hackman. His kind of talent, his kind of presence, comes once in a lifetime. And though he is gone, his story continues on the screen, in the hearts of fans, and in the love of a daughter who has finally shared her truth. Gene Hackman's name will forever echo through Hollywood history. But at the end of it all, he wasn't just an actor. He was a father, a man. And now, thanks to his daughter's courage in speaking out, we can remember him not only for the roles he played, but for the life he lived. It begins with a silence. The kind of silence that only follows after the passing of a giant. Gene Hackman is gone, and with him, an entire chapter of Hollywood's golden age feels like it has closed forever. But just when the world thought Hackman's story had ended, another voice rose from the shadows. A voice that had been quiet for years. His daughter, and in breaking her silence, she revealed truths about her father that Hollywood never knew, and the world never expected. For decades, Gene Hackman was more than just a movie star. He was a force. He could dominate a scene with nothing more than a look. His voice carried weight, his presence commanded respect, and his performances lingered long after the credits rolled. When Hackman was on screen, you believed him. You believed the detective chasing down criminals in The French Connection. You believed the ruthless villain Lex Luthor plotting Superman's downfall. You believed the tough, hardened coach in Hoosiers, pushing his team toward glory. You believed the sheriff in Unforgiven standing against Clint Eastwood in one of the most unforgettable Western showdowns in film history. But here's the part no one tells you. Away from the cameras, Gene Hackman was not the towering figure people imagined. He was private, guarded, almost mysterious. He hated interviews, avoided premieres, and kept his personal life locked behind closed doors. To Hollywood, he was elusive. To his fans, he was unknowable. And yet, to his daughter, he was simply Dad. And now, she is telling the world who that man really was. She remembers the nights sitting in a darkened movie theater, watching her father transform into someone else entirely. Around her, strangers gasped and cheered, but she didn't just see the character. She saw the man she had breakfast with that morning, the man who sometimes came home tired and short-tempered, the man who would later tuck her into bed. Imagine how surreal it must have felt to share your father with the entire world, yet still feel like you never really had him all to yourself. She doesn't sugarcoat the truth. Gene Hackman was brilliant, but he wasn't always easy. The same intensity that electrified audiences sometimes carried into his home, he was demanding, a perfectionist, and sometimes, yes, distant. Fame had a way of stealing time from the family, but alongside those struggles, there were moments of rare tenderness. A hug after a long day, words of advice whispered not by a Hollywood star, but by a father who wanted his children to be strong, to be resilient, to find their own way in a world that would not always be kind. And then came the silence of retirement. Hackman shocked the industry when he walked away in 2004. No farewell tour, no emotional goodbye interviews. He just stopped. For fans, it felt like he had vanished. But for his daughter, this was a gift. Finally, she had her father without the cameras, without the red carpets, without the endless roles pulling him away. Those years, she says, she met the real Gene Hackman, not the star, not the legend, just the man. He painted, he wrote. He sat in the quiet stillness of his New Mexico home. She recalls long afternoons together, just watching the sky change colors. As the sun set, sitting in silence, not needing to say a word. These were the moments no one in Hollywood would ever see. And yet, they were the moments that defined him most. But her story doesn't paint him as flawless. Far from it. She admits that being his daughter wasn't always easy. Teachers, friends, strangers, everyone knew who her father was. Expectations followed her everywhere. His movies will live forever. His performances will continue to inspire. But more than that, his humanity, his flaws, his tenderness, his silence will echo. In the hearts of those who truly knew him, Gene Hackman has left the stage. But the curtain does not fall on his legacy. Through his daughter's words, we are reminded that even when legends die, their light never truly fades. Disclaimer: the content in this video is based on publicly available information, media sources, and opinions. It is created for entertainment and educational purposes only. We do not claim or guarantee that every detail is 100% accurate.